I went to the Bronx High School of Science, which was quite famous at the time, although I think by now it's been equaled or surpassed by other high schools in New York, like Stuyvesant High School. But the wonderful thing about the Bronx High School of Science was, and I guess still is, that you had to take an exam to get in. And as a result, it was filled with bright kids who got a lot of ego gratification out of learning science and mathematics, so that you weren't regarded as some kind of nerd or twerp if you were studying calculus on your own. That was regarded as very cool. In fact, the real top of the social tree were the people who were learning differential equations on their own, something that goes beyond first-year calculus. It was a wonderful environment because of the other students. Some of the teachers were terrific. I had a PhD in chemistry, teaching chemistry, which went over very well. I had a wonderful course in European history. I had a course in physics that was taught by a young man who knew less physics than anyone in the class. It doesn't matter that much. You have to take your education in your own hands. And I learned these things, and I was a pretty good student, but it never appeared to me that I was able to add anything to what was already known. There was this enormous amount of knowledge about atoms and quantum mechanics and chemistry and so on. And I thought that you had to learn it all before you could begin to contribute anything of your own. And I never, by the time I graduated Cornell, I never thought I could begin to do this kind of work. I went off after graduating to a famous physics institute in Europe, in Copenhagen, Denmark, headed by a great physicist, Niels Bohr. And it wasn't because I had some plan that this was going to get me into research. It was because I was just married. And my wife and I had never been to Europe, and we thought it would be a wonderful romantic way to spend our first year of marriage in Copenhagen, in Europe. And I carried with me a bag of physics books with the idea that that was what I would do during the year. I would sit and read these books. And I was making a kind of sacrifice because there weren't physics courses at Copenhagen like you have in an American graduate school. But that's all right. I would give up 1 year of my career to a wonderful romantic adventure with my new bride. Well, I arrived at the Niels Bohr Institute, and almost immediately I was asked, what kind of research are you planning to do here? And I said, what, are you kidding? I can't do research. I brought a bag of books. I'm going to spend the year reading physics and learning more of this stuff. And they said, oh no. Everyone at the Niels Bohr Institute does research. You have to start doing research. I said, I can't do that. And they said, well, we'll suggest some research problems to you. And one senior American physicist and a senior Swedish physicist suggested research problems. And I didn't know anything about the subjects involved, but I found I could pick it up by reading the scientific literature in these fields. One was in nuclear physics, and the other was in a fancy branch of mathematical physics called quantum field theory. And I didn't know that much about these things, but I could learn what I needed in order to do the problems, the research problems that were suggested to me. And by the end of the year in Copenhagen, I had one article that was ready to be published in a scientific journal. And by the time I got back to America and started my graduate studies in Princeton, I found I wasn't a year behind, but in fact, I felt like a physicist, not a student anymore. I felt grown up. And it wasn't long before I began to think of research problems of my own and begin my own research career. So what kind of moral can you take from this? I don't know. One moral is, I guess, You don't have to know everything to get started doing something original. You can pick it up. If you wait until you've really learned everything there is to know about some field of science that you want to work in, you're never going to do any original work. You should get in it, jump in. The way to learn to swim is to jump in the pool and start swimming. And it works. You can do that. I guess the other thing I learned is don't worry about planning things too carefully. I had it all worked out that I was making a sacrifice of a year by going off to Copenhagen instead of starting graduate school in America. It worked out pretty well. You never know how things are going to work out. So roll with it, do your best, and when you have a chance to do something romantic like spending your first year with your newly married wife abroad, it isn't always a mistake.